This podcast is part of the Blueberry Network, where listeners and podcasters come together. Find out more at blueberrywithnoease.com.
The Eat Sleep Right podcast is brought to you by generous grant from the Built on Dreams Media Network, with additional funding by the Sims Media Foundation, and from the generosity of listeners like you.
Stand by, please. Rolling on set. On set.
Welcome to episode 129 of the Eat Sleep Right podcast. I'm your host, Adam Scull. The Eat Sleep Right podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download at audibletrial.com/Eat Sleep Right. Over 100,000 titles to choose from for your Kindle, iPhone, iPad, or MP3 player. The Eat Sleep Right podcast is available on the site as well as the iTunes store, where you can also subscribe to it. My goal is to find out how writers became authors, how they got where they are, how they do what they do, and go from a blank piece of paper to a finished manuscript. EatSleepRight.net is also made possible by the generous cooperation of Writers World Facebook group. Join the Writers World Facebook group. Learn how to become a better writer. If you enjoy the Eat Sleep Right podcast and you've had your own adventures in writing, I'd like to hear from you. Tell me about yourself and your story, and I may get back to you and have you as a guest on the Eat Sleep Right podcast. If you have any questions or comments, anything at all, I'd like to hear from you. The email address is comments@eatsleepright.net. MJ Summers, author of Breaking Love, Book 2 in the Full Heart series, welcome to the Eat Sleep Right podcast.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks so much for having me today. I'm so excited to be here.
Contemporary romance is your genre. What made you pick it?
That's an excellent question. You know, there are so many different choices. Yes, I write in the contemporary romance genre. For me, it was really where my interest lies. I started that about a year and a half ago now. The reason really behind it was that I've always loved romance. I've always loved to watch romantic movies or read books about love stories. I thought I would like to try writing a book that I would enjoy as a reader, that I would just be able to get lost into. I'm also so interested in other people that I know, finding out about how did they fall in love with the person that they're with. There's always been a real curiosity there for me. Last year, I decided to start writing. I decided that this would be the place to start for me because I've always had such an interest in romance.
Were you schooled in the art of writing?
I was not, actually. I have a science degree. The highest level of training that I have is first-year English course at university.
With that in mind, was it difficult for you to sit down and write your first book?
I actually did not find it a daunting task, Adam. I found it quite exciting. It was something I was doing just to see if I could do it. So I took it as an exciting challenge, really exciting. It's a wonderful feeling. There was no pressure on me for that. At the beginning, when I started writing, I actually didn't even tell anyone I was doing it. It was just for me, just something to try, something completely different. As I got farther into it, the excitement that I had grew. I would go back and reread what I wrote and get very excited, realizing that I actually was writing a good story, something that I myself would love to read if I had just picked it up off of a shelf in a bookstore.
Not ever having written before, was it difficult for you to handle critiques?
It was not, actually. Part of the reason is because in my previous training, we had a saying which was that you give feedback with your heart and you receive it with your mind. As someone who just wrote my first book, I expected to get lots of very negative feedback. And what I got back was fair criticism that I took as a learning opportunity. I really feel like I was able to take my ego out of it and just see it as a learner.
Revisions, love them or hate them?
It's a love-hate thing for me because I tend to feel a little bit overwhelmed by it. I have to keep reminding myself that by the time I get through the first revision, I'm going to love my story so much more. By the time I've gotten through the fifth revision, it's probably going to be the best story that it could be.
A question I often ask authors is, how do you write about what you know without writing about yourself? So I'm bound to ask if you had this same strong-willed romantic notion towards your husband.
Yes. We met in high school and we were friends, and it was only once we were in university that we ended up together. Very quickly into our relationship, I realized that he was the guy for me. We just wanted to be together constantly.
So not unlike a romance novel, your heart was swept away.
Being swept away. Just that complete notion of being swept away by another human being, just knowing that you just connect with each other, you belong together. So that is the feeling that comes with me when my characters meet each other, go through the hell that I put them through before they can be together. So although in my own personal life, we did not have a rocky, difficult relationship getting together, we did have that wonderful feeling of falling in love. That piece of it absolutely comes with me when I'm writing.
As a contemporary romance author, do you write in that glorified sweeping in-love situation like a David Lean film, wide scope, beauty everywhere, or do you bring in today's realities and frustrations to your characters? You alluded to it before, but I'd like to hear a little bit more.
If a person is reading one of my books, it will definitely be based in a realistic world. The problems that the characters face, the characters themselves, their own insecurities and fears, their flaws, weaknesses, and they're also the strengths that they carry with them are real. I'm creating people that I think other people can say, yes, I would say that. It would be terrible, but I would say it. You know, we're looking at people who maybe are struggling with money. I'm not writing about multi-billionaires. I'm writing about people who are running a ranch and they're trying to make a go of it. Or a single mom who's a photographer. She's trying to put food on the table and make ends meet and figure out if she could maybe this year pay somebody to shovel her big driveway for her because she's just so sick of having to go out and shovel every time it snows. So it's things like that that I'm writing about makes it relatable. And that's the beauty of contemporary romance. It's such a big genre. Essentially, what that genre means is that it's set in contemporary times. As far as what you're writing about, characters that you're creating, it could be those fantasy type scenarios where a writer may write about a multi-billionaire who meets a supermodel. My third book that I just wrote where it's about a house contractor and the woman that he falls in love with. It's beautiful that way. There's just so many options.
How did you come up with the title?
The first book was called Break-In 2. I decided that for this particular series, I would like the word break or breaking as a way to connect the 4 books. So Breaking Love, I liked the sound of it because, it clearly shows you that it's a love story, but also it's sort of a play on the term making love.
How many hours a week do you spend writing?
That actually varies from week to week. My writing life actually revolves around my family life. And so it really depends on whether I have, any children at home sick or if it's a school holiday, those types of things. I try to fit in writing into whatever pocket I can. So if I've got 10 minutes, I'll sit down and write. If I've got 3 hours, beautiful. I sit down and write as much as I can. If I'm on a deadline, I might be writing 50 hours a week. If I don't have a deadline, more around 20 hours a week.
Does your family get on you and say, Mom's on the computer again?
Yes, they do. Yeah, my kids do. It's been a real adjustment for them to get used to having me doing work that is not mom stuff. Because for 8.5 years, I just looked after my kids. It's been an adjustment for them to see mom has to work now. But it's healthy, I think. It's teaching them that the world isn't necessarily going to revolve around them.
Finish this sentence. The writer's inner journey is
to let the story out.
I've heard a lot of authors say, when they get in front of the keyboard, it's almost as if their characters take over. Would you say there's a similarity between your answer just now about getting the story out, and do your characters really kind of take over? Because in the end, you really are writing your characters.
My experience is that it is the creative side of my brain that's doing the work. When I'm actually sitting down to write, I don't really think of it as the characters taking over. But I see it more as though there's a movie playing in my mind. It's happening and I'm experiencing it as a viewer as much as I am as a writer. I'm seeing it happen and I'm just typing. I do sometimes find that I don't know something is going to happen until the second that I type it. That definitely does occur in my writing. It's very interesting to me to see how that works, and my best work is done in that mode where it's just very much the creative side and shutting out the critical side of your brain or the logical side of your brain that is second guessing and questioning and critiquing everything you do. It really does feel as though the stories are just coming through me instead of me forcing some ideas onto a page.
So you tend to visualize the scenes before you actually write them down?
I'm visualizing them as they're happening. I start writing. It's happening in my mind as I'm writing. If I get called away from the computer because somebody spilled milk or, or it's time to get supper cooking, it's almost as though I'm hitting the pause button. That can happen mid-sentence. I walk away. I could come back a few hours later, just pick up where I was, and I'm hitting the play button and the story is continuing.
Beginning, middle, or end? What do you find the easiest? What do you find the hardest?
I've definitely heard a lot of writers say the middle is the hardest part. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. There are times when I'm stuck in that middle. I paint my characters into a corner and I think, seriously, how do I get them out of this? That can become the challenge to figure out. Generally speaking, you know the beginning and you know the end. You know a general idea of what the journey is that your characters are going to go through, but not necessarily the details. Getting my characters out of the corner I painted them in a bouquet of flowers that one of the characters had thrown in the garbage. I had written that 2 months earlier for a different purpose completely. Trying to get to the end of the story, I realized that those flowers held the key to getting them past the problem that they were in.
What's the nicest thing anyone ever said about your book?
I had one woman who said that she read my first book when she was going through a horrible time in her personal life, and that book got her through about 4 days of it. She was really grateful.
And your backstory?
In my own mind, I have the backstory ready before I start writing. I know where these characters have come from and why they do what they do. When I'm writing, I try to include some of that at the very beginning, just enough so that people understand the character. I want people to understand the motivation that they have throughout the story and not be left wondering throughout what the motivation is. You need some suspense, obviously. You want your reader to move along with you and wonder what's going to happen next. As a reader, I never like that feeling of, I don't know why they're doing this. This doesn't make sense to me, why the character would say this or do this. So I try to build in a backstory insofar as to allow people to understand the motivation of the character. As far as adding that piece as we move through the story, that also does, of course, happen.
How does having a family influence your current writing? Or does it at all? Other than the obvious, of course, of how much time you have due to your family.
Well, several ways, I would say. One thing is that I do have children in 2 of the books. And in my 4th book, there will be a child in that book as well. I feel as though being a mom has helped me to understand that relationship at a very deep level. It also helps me to write young children because I live with them and I know how they talk. So I think it helps in that way. It has given me a different perspective on my own parents and on relationship and how parents view their adult children as well, because I know how I will feel about my children when they're grown up. And they're fully capable of doing things, but I'll still think that they're little.
Do romance writers generally look at life through rose-colored glasses?
I honestly don't know, because I actually don't really know many romance writers. For myself, I would say that in my personal life, I think a lot of the time I'm a very realistic person. Some people might say pessimistic, but I would say realistic. So for me, I would actually say I don't see the world through rose-colored glasses. I don't just kind of float through with this really romantic, airy-fairy way of looking at things. I think that's reflected in my writing and to some extent.
That being said, are you an outliner or do you write by the seat of your pants?
The answer to that question is in transition right now. When I wrote my first book, I think like a lot of people who, when they write their first novel, I was definitely a seat of the pantser, I didn't actually even know much about plotting or outlining. Now that I'm on my 3rd novel, doing a revision, like very major revision on it, I have gone back and started looking at ways to outline and plot, tighten up my process. I'm finding that those things are quite helpful. The information that I've been learning just by reading books about those topics. I will always have that creative flow going when I'm actually writing the scenes and writing the story. It's going to be beneficial for me to have a really good outline so I have that map ahead of me. Whether I follow it 100%, probably it won't be, but at least I'll have some direction.
Is character development easy for you, or do you have struggles?
I would say that I found the character development easy for the first 2 books and for my novella. For this 3rd book that I'm still working on, I have had trouble getting a real grasp on my leading man in my 3rd book. So I've had to go back and try to really figure him out. But with this 2nd book, with the characters are Luke and Megan, Luke is a character that came from the 1st book. And I had a really good sense of who he was in the 1st book. So it really helped. Megan, the single mom who he falls in love with, is someone who I could really quickly relate to. I could just see what she was going through and what she really needed in her life.
Where can we find out more about you and your books on the internet?
You can find out more about my books and about me on mjsummersbooks.com. My books are available on Amazon. They will also be available at all ebook stores coming on October 28th in Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand as of December 2nd. My first 2 novels will actually be in brick-and-mortar stores. So that's very exciting for me. I've been lucky enough to get contracts with HarperCollins Canada as well as Piatkus and Tice in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. They are a division of Hachette.
It sounds like you've accomplished what you set out to do.
I sit back several times a week and absolutely thrilled at how things have gone and how lucky I am with where I've gotten to in such a short period of time.
M.J. Summers, author of the contemporary romance Full Heart series, Breaking Love, Book 2, thank you so much for joining me today on the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast.
Thank you very much, Adam. Thanks for having me.
If you're looking for a community that can offer you tools, support, and advice to start your own adventures in writing, then prepare to have the cauldron of your imagination stirred. I started the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast so more people can understand what it's like to be a writer and to get more eyes on your books. My goal is to help you achieve the success you so richly deserve. I salute your success in writing.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast, located at eatsleepwrite.net. Please send any questions, comments or suggestions to comments@eatsleepwrite.net. Please consider a donation to support the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast. Donations can be sent to our PayPal address at donations@eatsleepwrite.net. Once in a lifetime, the theme music for the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast, courtesy of Stephen Paul. All rights reserved, used by permission. Please join us again for the next edition of the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast.